Welcome to Voice of India in our show, The Real Estate Secrets. This is your host, Manish Arora, and today we have with us Mr. Gord Steeves. And Gord Steeves is a lawyer and he's one of the partner of AVS Law and has been practicing real estate law for the last more than 20 years. Welcome to the show, Mr. Gord.
Oh, very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. The moment we all are excited about buying home, buying residential properties, and we are pretty excited about our dream home. So the moment the offer gets accepted and the conditions are satisfied, like our excitement goes out of the roof. And right?
Yeah, it does.
And when the day of possession comes and things don't go as they were supposed to be and the promises are not kept and things are not delivered as they were promised, it turns into nightmare.
Well, it can. It's important for people to remember, I think, that's honestly pretty rare. Most of the time, things go pretty well, right? But you're not wrong. There are sometimes problems, right?
Yeah.
The first thing I would say is this. I'm very grateful as a lawyer when we receive offers to our office from real estate agents who have prepared the offers for their clients and with their clients in a good and professional manner. It's very important, I think, that people remember and realize always that when you're buying a home, you're going to need the help of a lawyer, of course, to close the transaction when the time comes for the date of possession. But you're also going to need the help of a professional realtor, if at all possible, to assist you in writing that offer, because the offer that you're going to sign is the contract that's going to guide the lawyer throughout the entire process. And the lawyer isn't part of that. It's done by the professional realtor on the ground. Normally speaking, well, you'd know better than I, there's probably, a 1 or 2 month gap usually between the time that an offer is signed and that the date of possession occurs. Would that be about right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Before that, I want to also add that yes, definitely, as Gord said, it's not all of the times like it happens, but our goal is to save the new generation and the first home buyers who are buying the house so that they don't come across those problems and they have that peaceful possession, what we say.
absolutely.
So lots of due diligence is required. So Mr. Gord would be explaining us in detail what kind of due diligence before, I think before the offer gets, the conditions are satisfied, and then after that also. So please let us know.
Of course. So when the offer comes in, it's important to remember what a lawyer is doing for you, right? So if you sign an offer on April 1st and your possession is June 1st, there's a period of a few months in there where the lawyer is going to do what they have to do in order to make sure that the transaction goes smoothly. You have to always remember that the house is one part of it, obviously, but what you're really purchasing is title to the land underneath the house, of course.
Yes.
So in our community, whether it's here in the Maples or whether it's in St. Vital or whether it's in St. James, the entire province is divided into lots. And they're separated by imaginary lines that people can discern by way of survey and all that sort of thing.
Yep.
And you have to remember that is what you are buying. And you're buying the building on top of it, which is, of course, generally speaking, the house and the garage and what have you. So the way I explain it to people is if you imagine that little rectangle piece of ground right now, before we do our work with you, it's registered in the name of somebody else, right? And the job that we do is we make sure that we take that title that's registered in the name of the seller, and ultimately we're going to move it into the name of the buyer. And that process has to be stewarded through the property registry downtown. The proper documents have to be filed, etc. Now, any given house, as you're driving down the street, if you look at the house, you can imagine the house as existing on a piece of land, and every house has its own, what we call, title, of course. And every person who lives in a house, if they're the owners, they exist on title in name. So if you and your wife have a house, you will both exist as what we call joint tenants on the house, normally, not always, and that'll be shown on the status of title. Beneath that will be all the registrations that appear on the title. So every home has that. They have an owner or owners, and they have registrations against the property. Those registrations against the property generally consist of, often, caveats that exist from Hydro, from the city of Winnipeg, from the telephone system, sometimes municipalities, sometimes developers, that sort of thing. And then often, of course, there'll be a mortgage registered against the property.
Yeah.
Sometimes, though, there'll be more than that, and not in a good way. Right?
Yeah, there can be lien, there can be like other like restrictions too, right?
Right.
So I still remember like we had a very interesting deal, the seller sold the property assuming that the total rectangular piece like belongs to him, and the buyer assumed the same.
Right.
And after that, after some time, buyer comes to know when the buyer's lawyer did the due diligence. You know what they came up with? They said the open space adjacent to the garage, which we call it a parking pad, right?
Right.
That didn't belong to the buyer.
Oh, is that right? It belonged to somebody else. It was part of a different
Somebody
title.
else, yeah.
Yes,
So that was with the city.
Fascinating issue, and I'm glad you brought it up. Because when you go through a lawyer and you're purchasing a property, what you're very interested in is you want to make sure that the house that you are buying is located entirely within the boundaries of the lot that you are buying. So the problem that you're talking about exactly, right? It has happened in the past where homes are built on the wrong part of a lot, or they're built in a way that encroaches on another lot. Now, when I say encroach, when you build on a lot, when houses were originally built, they can't just be built right up against the lot line generally. They've got to be a few feet back, 4 feet back.
Setbacks.
Yeah, they've got to be set back in the front, they've got to be set back in the back, they've got to be set back on the side. There's regulations that cover this, right? It used to be, a long time ago, when I started in this business, that you could search a property and discover exactly where a house existed on the property by virtue of what we call a survey and a building location certificate.
Yep.
You've seen those before,
Yes,
right? And they still exist, and they're still done if people want them to be done. And the odd time, they are done on purchases. They're done a lot less nowadays because now, in the context of most deals, that are most purchases and most sales, the purchasers will acquire something that we call title insurance, right? To guard against the exact problem that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I was coming to that.
Right. Yeah, and it's a form of insurance that lawyers will get for you on your behalf that will help cover you against instances where the property is not is not existing on the lot as it should be. That the buildings don't exist on the lot as they should be. Encroachments from the other side or whatever it happens to be. Also guards against permits and issues like that.
So what all the title insurance covers?
Title insurance deals mainly with building locations, permitting, some utility issues, and the like. Right. So it helps the client be protected from some common issues that exist with respect to purchasing. Things like permits are probably the most common issue in a municipality that title insurance will protect a client, at least to some degree, with respect to.
So, for
purchase.
example, let's say, the seller finished the basement and didn't take the permit.
Yep.
So now, like, the buyer has the title insurance, and now he can, like, if he has to redo as per the city, so the title insurance will pay for that.
That's one example. Yes, if a buyer purchases a property, and I'm speaking generally because there are some exceptions, and you have to be very careful about that. But if a purchaser purchases a property and there was work done to the property, and it was shown that there was extensive work done, work that properly should have been permitted. If in fact the local municipality does show up at some stage and discover that the work was done improperly and without proper permitting, they have the right to issue a work order or some inspection notice, and they can come in and they can review the property. And if work needs to be done to bring the work up to code, then obviously the new buyer is the person that's responsible for those efforts.
Yep.
If they're insured will the insurance title insurance will assist them with that process, hopefully, and they usually will.
So as suggested by Mr. Gord, title insurance, it's a small thing. It's a small amount, probably $300 to $400.
It depends on the type. On a residential purchase, it's a little bit more than that. Not much.
Maybe that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, $400 to $500, let's say. But it saves you lots of thousands of dollars when things like that happen.
But of course, insurance doesn't replace good due diligence and things like that.
Definitely, yeah. That's a separate.
Because you don't want to get in a position where you're overly reliant on insurance, obviously,
Sure.
which is why you as a realtor would be performing permit searches with respects to properties that your clients are buying on your behalf. Another wonderful thing that professional realtors do in our community is they will walk and they'll be doing these searches, ensuring that they're in place and that you're aware, because oftentimes, as you're aware, the city of Winnipeg, they keep a running tally of permits that are taken out.
Yep.
Right? So in the example you just used, where the person never took out a permit at all, there'd be no way to search that, for example. But the other instance, of course, is where people take permits out on renovation projects on their property.
Yeah.
But they don't take the final steps to
close
it.
it.
Yes. That's
So
right.
the permit has to be closed, definitely.
Yeah, and that's a different story when it comes to title insurance, because an open permit wouldn't be covered in all likelihood. So that's where you come in, that's where I come in, to make sure that people are taking title to homes where any open permits have been closed and they've been dealt with. The best place to deal with it is at your end, the front end, where it could be written into the contract that the permit shall be closed in advance, because you could know that.
Definitely,
Yeah.
yeah. That's what we a lot of times make sure that if permit is pulled out, it has to be closed. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense, right?
Right.
Open permit is not.
Right. And and once as we're going through that process at closing, we're also ensuring, of course, that as we're moving title with a transfer of title to the new purchasers, we also obviously have to make sure that we're discharging all the old registrations on title. Now, things like the caveats that are registered by the municipality, City of Winnipeg, water, hydro, MTS caveats, those will stay on the property.
Those needs to.
Yeah, of course. And those are, we explain to people, those are just rights of access that these utilities have to property if ever they need to access the property, probably to do repairs, right? Doesn't give them the right to come into your property without permission or anything like that, but just gives them a right to access, because sometimes, as you can appreciate, utilities require attention on one property, otherwise it affects the greater community. We're not concerned about those generally. More concerned, obviously, about making sure that the mortgages registered on title, any judgments, any liens, all of those things are paid out as part of the process.
Yeah, and also I think you mentioned about the encroachment. So like, does the title insurance help with encroachments also? If if let's say our property is encroaching onto others, or others are encroaching on our land, sometimes like this. Like a lot of times I've seen the common issues are the garage or the eavesdropper. So what happens in that case with the title insurance?
Well, what title insurance generally does, and it's hard to speak about specifics because every situation is different. Mm-hmm. And I'm obviously not the insurer, so I can't speak for them. But generally speaking, if there's an issue that affects your title, if it's caused by an encroachment, if it's caused by an issue with respect to another property, or if it comes to light that someone is affecting your property, like a municipality, and saying you now have to comply, those are the circumstances where title insurance will come in and protect, if there's a cost associated with it, generally speaking.
And also one of the common issues, like very common issues, we see that the mutual promises are not kept. Like let's say, for example, like the buyer is promised, like by the seller, that all mechanical, electrical, and plumbing would be in working order. So lots of times I have seen like it's not as like delivered. It's not delivered as promised. So how can we? I mean, legally, how can we get that promise fulfilled, or how can we, get hold? And what's the best solution in this case? Your advice?
Well, these are hard, only mostly because they're usually very small issues, right? Or often they're small issues. You're talking about a stove that doesn't work properly, or a dishwasher that doesn't work, or things like that. Essentially, the whatever's being sold has to be in working order at the time of possession. So it becomes a case of, if somebody comes in and, for example, the stove doesn't work at all, right? It just doesn't work at all. Then that is an issue that has to be dealt with, and clearly, depending upon the contract, but generally speaking, the vendor has that responsibility, right, to ensure. So if that, practically speaking, happens, the lawyers or the agents will try to work it out, and oftentimes is the new purchaser will get a quote, a cost to fix it, and the vendor will reimburse them, right? It's a lot easier said than done, though, in practicality, right? Because oftentimes the vendor is moved on. Nobody knows nobody knows where the vendor is. They're trying to execute against the vendor, and it can be difficult. So each client, and as you can appreciate, whenever somebody takes possession of a new house, but it's a used house, right?
Used.
They're taking possession of a used house, but new to them. There's always going to be small things, right? That they need to, the imperfections in a house that they probably won't be too concerned about. So people have to sort of make up their own minds as to at what stage do they become concerned about it, and if so, do they want to take the proactive steps, or do they just want to simply deal with it themselves and not worry about it, and if they can fix it themselves, or if the cost is negligible. Of course, the odd time, and thankfully it's very rare, the problems can be a little more severe, and you get into more complicated issues.
It recently happened with one of my clients, as said, it was promised, like what I discussed with you, but after possession, furnace wasn't working, AC wasn't working, and there was a water leakage in the basement and the bathroom. So it was really hard for us to get hold of the vendor, because vendor was not there. But luckily we had the PDS.
Of course.
So PDS saved us. My client had to go to court. He got some claim back, but it wasted a lot of time. So that's what we we always try to, put that in front in the offer, so that,
Well, let me ask you this.
Yeah, sure.
How when you're working with clients, how often or how regularly would you bring in a professional inspector?
Most probably we will bring, definitely.
I see. Right.
Most probably when it's a newer house, we can see there would be less problems. When it's an older house, we can have a sense there's something wrong, right? It looks like it's not working, or there's some seepage, water seepage, we can smell it, and there are a lot of factors we can tell. Then we especially recommend our client, you should go for inspection, and then you have all the things in front of you to decide you want to go ahead or not.
Right. And because an inspector can maybe assist to some degree in finding, or maybe not finding, but at least giving a hint or a clue as to some bigger challenges that exist with respect to houses. Because as you know, you're probably looking for things like the foundation issues and electrical issues and the like.
Wiring, roofing.
Those are the ones that can really wind up being difficult. I find that the rest of things normally can be worked out in a fairly straightforward manner. If they're minor things, appliance related issues, because usually the cost isn't that great and the problems aren't that large. So rather than people running to court or doing those sorts of things, both parties would rather just resolve it and move on with their lives. It does, from time to time, it's unfortunate if any of those things happen, where it's a deeper, more systemic or endemic problem with the property that people have to look for. But again, using a PDS, which gives the obligation to the vendor to disclose any water issues or seepage or any of that type of thing, sort of gets them to reflect, right? And in my experience, vendors are generally speaking very honest about it. They will say, yes, I've had water here this year. This is what we did about it.
Yeah.
We haven't had any problems since, right? And a well-written property disclosure statement will be just like that. House is closing, or the purchase is closing this year. The vendors will have written in 2017, we had seepage in the northwest corner of our garage. It was an ice dam issue. We fixed the shingles. We did this. We haven't had an issue since. Fine. You can see there's a water stain. People understand what happened. Maybe even an invoice for the work that was done, and it gives people a level of comfort, and it makes them revisit it. Because as much as a purchaser doesn't want to buy a property where there's an issue, a vendor doesn't want an issue either when they sell the property and they've moved on and they now have to deal with it.
Okay, and also like I've seen, like let's go to investment properties. Like for example, it's R2 zoned, or it's a multifamily, or it's a grandfathered mixed use. But now, so how do we take care of the zoning regulations when we, how do you make sure that the zoning which is written in the offer is actually it is or not?
Well, I mean, the title search and the permitting should show you what the property is capable of, right? The building that exists, assumedly, was built for the purpose at the time. Otherwise, an occupancy permit wouldn't have been obtained. So it should be okay, unless, of course, you're looking at some type of recent construction that looks a little bit suspect. I'm not sure that's very common. But on those types of, on multifamily, the issues that you often do see are often issues of tenancy, leasing, and contracts and those sorts of things. Obviously, I would say probably maybe the more common problem that we see is there's some disclarity or unclarity, whatever the proper word is, with respect to tenants and vacant property and those sorts of things. If people are buying multifamily homes for the purposes of renovation, and then they find out there's tenants, or if the proper notice hasn't been given and the tenants can't leave, and those sorts of things, you have to be careful of that.
Well, it was a very important discussion, and we learned a lot of things today. And so please stay connected. We'll be coming again with another with different topics related to real estate. So we'll be focusing next time on investment and commercial properties. What are the things to be taken care of? What's the due diligence required? So please stay connected with us, and thanks for your time. Thanks, Mr. Gord, for joining us. And
thank you.
Mr. Gord can he can be contacted at I think AVS Law, right?
Yes.
So please let our viewers know that how, if they want to connect with you, then
avslaw.com or .ca, I think, is our website.
And where's your office?
We're on St. Anne's Road. We're located just south of Bishop Grandin on St. Anne's Road.
Thank you for your time, and
I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.